happening tonight in Vancouver.
We did have a little bit of smoke a couple of weeks ago, but this is certainly more intense than that.
An air quality advisory continues for Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Experts say it's one of the worst instances of smoke and haze we've seen in the region this year.
It puts a lot of pressure on. I'm talking to a couple paramedics this morning, and they just said, it's really tiring. They're tired.
Everyone can feel it. Across BC, we are in the midst of our third heat wave of the summer. And after hundreds of reported heat-related deaths in June, BC paramedics say they're doing everything they can as they still cope with staffing shortages.
If you're planning to travel this winter, you may need to show proof of a COVID-19 vaccine, whether it's on a train, a plane, or a cruise. More on why Canada is mandating mandatory jabs.
This is City News everywhere.
No matter your town or your city, it's hard to ignore the haze around us. An air quality advisory continues for Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. And experts say this comes on the heels of a fairly bad wildfire season. And you can thank smoke from this side and the other side of the border for what you're seeing outside.
This is the first time that we've really seen significant wildfire smoke come into the region, but we did have a little bit of smoke a couple of weeks ago. But this is certainly more intense than that.
Kyle Howe is an air quality analyst with Metro Vancouver, the group responsible for issuing air-related advisories.
In the last number of years, we've had a lot more instances of smoke coming into the region, which is an indicator of our changing climate. This year, there have been a lot of fires burning in the province and in Washington, Oregon, and California. We in the Lower Mainland have been pretty lucky with regards to smoke in that we have not had significant smoke up until this point.
Howe says the air quality rating is worse in certain regions.
It ranges from 1 to 10. Right now, as an example, for people in Eastern Fraser Valley, their AQHI is a 10 plus, which is the highest end of the scale, so the worst air quality.
And the heat also makes things worse.
It may actually cool down some regions depending on how thick the smoke is, but that in and of itself will bring its own issues with respect to air quality.
So is there any actual relief on the way?
Take a stronger wind now that the smoke's here to flush it out. And we're really not going to get into that wind until Sunday late. So the smoke's going to be around at the very least in pockets through a good chunk of the weekend.
Until the fires die down, we'll likely continue to see smoke for a bit, which is why long stretches of rain will be integral.
Talking about a week's worth of rain. Enough rain to really do something to the wildfires. It is going to rain, but 15 millimeters, 10 millimeters here and there, and then 5 days of sun, that's nowhere near enough to do anything to the wildfires.
People are encouraged to stay away from the haze as much as possible, especially if you're someone with health problems like asthma. The advisories are being reassessed daily. In Vancouver, Rhea Renouf, City News.
We're seeing increased call volumes and over and above our normalcies, if you can call that, which is very busy as it is.
Heat records are once again being broken across the province, and this burst of hot weather has paramedics on edge. That's according to the union, which says staff are traumatized after a devastating number of people died during BC's heat wave in June. They say they are doing everything they can to prevent a similar situation from happening again.
Just go into those homes where people were ill or passed away because of the heat or as a result of some of the heat. That was a lot of pressure on them on top of the pressure they face every day.
During the province's first heat wave of the summer in June, hundreds of people died suddenly. The province's chief coroner saying most of those deaths were heat related, disproportionately affecting seniors who lived alone in apartments. Troy Clifford with the Ambulance Paramedics of BC says staff are always hoping for the best and preparing for the worst.
They're trying to go call to call and compensate for our shortages of staffing, which is still an ongoing problem, but they're seeing respiratory calls, the heat calls, not in the same manner we did that last time, because I think people are more aware, obviously. I think they're better prepared. They've been listening to the best practices and advice to check in on those shut-ins and the more vulnerable and look after them.
Fraser Health and Vancouver Coastal Health are so concerned about the soaring temperatures, they've issued a joint extreme heat alert and are providing guidance and preventative measures for the public. The Lower Mainland is simultaneously coping with an air quality advisory as well. People are being asked to stay indoors, but also find ways to keep cool.
Most people are at higher risk from extreme heat than from wildfire smoke. So overall, the recommendation is if a home is overheated and there's an opportunity to cool it down by opening a window, go ahead and do that. There's a balance at play here. We understand there's certainly that tension, but really to prioritize that cooling.
White Rock, Squamish, and Abbotsford are just a few of the municipalities who have shattered heat records this week, and temperatures aren't expected to drastically cool down until early next week.
So right now, we're optimistic. We're going to get through this weekend as best we can. We're still short-staffed, and we still got some hurdles to get through to get to the long-term challenges or changes that we're working on. But
in New Westminster, Ashley Burr, City News.
Some Americans with weaker immune systems will be getting COVID-19 booster shots. Where does Canada stand on the issue?
There are 717 new cases of COVID-19 across the province tonight. It's the highest daily case count in this province since early May. No new deaths have been reported in the last day. 82 people are currently in hospital with 39 in intensive care. Most active cases in the province right now are in the interior.
The cost of the election will surprise a lot of people, but it will also make it clear that this election may not be necessary.
The possibility of a pandemic election comes with a hefty price tag.
If you want to board a commercial plane, take a cruise ship, or travel between provinces by train, you may soon need proof you've gotten your COVID-19 vaccines.
And we're not just talking about travel here. If you work for the federal government, either in the public sector for a crown corporation or in a federally regulated industry, negotiations are underway to make the vaccine a job requirement. And all of this could be in place by the end of October.
Canadians don't want to go back to lockdowns. Canadians don't want to go back to travel restrictions.
Federal Liberal ministers saying these new mandatory vaccine requirements essential to keep the economy open as threats of the Delta variant rise.
Governments requiring vaccines to travel. We have not seen this since the advent of the charter.
This health law expert expecting legal challenges to the unprecedented move, meaning it will be up to the government to prove in court restricting how someone can travel within Canada as well as abroad is necessary for public health, and that they can reasonably accommodate those who cannot medically be vaccinated, like allowing them to show proof of a negative test, but saying it's more complicated when the government makes the rules.
If Air Canada themselves mandated vaccines for air travel, they don't have the same obligations under the charter, for example, because the charter only binds government actors.
The two biggest airlines welcoming the news Friday that their employees and travelers will soon need to be vaccinated. Both Air Canada and WestJet saying they'll work with the government. As for federal workers and those who work for crown corporations, it's subject to negotiations with various unions and associations. And those who can't get the jab,
those will be cases that will be dealt with individually by the appropriate public service managers. But what we're saying to the federal public service is this is now a mandatory requirement to go to work in a federal workplace.
The federal Conservatives, meanwhile, in a statement to City News saying while they encourage everyone to get vaccinated, they, quote, support Canadians' right to determine their own health choices. We are in a crisis and Canadians expect reasonable measures, such as rapid testing for those who are not vaccinated to protect Canadians, especially the most vulnerable. In Edmonton, Carly Robinson, City News.
There have been mounting calls for UBC to make masks and vaccines mandatory on campus this fall. And now the university's president is coming out in support of that idea, saying he's been in talks with the province. Santa Ono says in light of the surge in cases, the school should require vaccines for anyone living in residence or taking part in high-density activities like sports or theater. While the school does have the power to make these changes, it's been following the province's lead. Ono says he'll have more information in the weeks to come.
The cost of the election will surprise a lot of people, But it will also make it clear that this election may not be necessary.
If speculation proves true and the Prime Minister triggers an election this weekend, Canadians can expect a heftier bill to exercise their right to vote, the added costs prompted by extra COVID protocols, as Canadians head into a fourth wave of the pandemic.
We have to remember that democracy is messy and it's expensive.
It's Ottawa's worst kept secret, the likelihood of a snap election to be called this Sunday. The estimated $610 million price tag is approximately $110 million more than the last two elections. Trudeau will be judged on his handling of the pandemic. And Brownsy believes he's hoping to turn his performance on public health into a majority government.
It plays well for the incumbents. Who wants to change a government in the middle of a pandemic? It would be, many voters will simply say that's not a reasonable thing to do.
This wouldn't be the first time Canadians cast a ballot during the pandemic. BC, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland have all held provincial elections during the pandemic. Provinces relied on early voting, mail-in ballots, and extra health protocols to pull them off. Canada's chief public health officer has said it can be done safely.
The key advice is really to observe all those good practices, and that would then make safe voting possible, whether it's the social distancing and mask wearing.
Despite the blessing from Tam, Brownsy believes the extra cost that comes with a pandemic election could be better spent.
I would make it very clear that this election, A, is unnecessary, and two, B, it's very expensive. And do we need to do that right now? Spend $600 million in the middle of this pandemic? Shouldn't that money be used for other purposes?
All signs point to a September 20th election date. In Ottawa, Nigel Newlove, City News.
Some Americans could be rolling up their sleeves a third time after U.S. regulators authorized an extra dose of the COVID-19 vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna. The decision applies to only about 3% of American adults, including transplant recipients and others with weaker immune systems. Some research suggests coronavirus antibodies may be significantly lower in these patients. The country has entered yet another wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the FDA is especially cognizant that immunocompromised people are particularly at risk for severe disease, it said in a statement. Other individuals who are fully vaccinated are adequately protected and do not need an additional dose of COVID-19 vaccine at this time. Meanwhile, Health Canada tells City News the federal panel of vaccine experts continues to closely monitor emerging evidence concerning the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines in those who are immunosuppressed. Israel, hoping to stem a surge of breakthrough infections, is expanding its booster campaign.
There's an opportunity to get the third vaccine and to do something that's good for the public health and good for my own health. I'm going to do it.
Third shots are now being offered to health workers and the general population 50 and older.
Israel is a trial country. We're trying to learn what to do with breakthrough infections. What we're finding out here will be of value for people throughout the world.
In Time magazine, the head of the World Health Organization doubled down on calls for a moratorium on boosters until at least the end of September to allow countries struggling to get access to even first doses the means to catch up. He writes, solving this gross inequity is a life or death situation for lower income countries.
Researchers at Toronto's University Health Network have recently found that giving an additional dose of the 2-dose vaccines is definitely the best way to increase protection in transplant patients, adding this should lead to a change in practice of giving third doses to this vulnerable population. Now, Health Canada added in its statement to City News that recommendations could be updated in the coming weeks. Karen Ciolin, City News.
Some called it controversial, some loved it. The Trans Am Totem wedged between Quebec Street near Expo and Pacific is on the way out. The city of Vancouver took to Twitter to let residents know the tower will be coming down this weekend, and some equipment can already be seen on site. Once the piece of public art is restored, it will be transferred to a new location, which is still to be determined. Vancouver's news is always available on the radio with News 1130 or online anytime at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11 o'clock. Thanks for watching and have a great night.